it all, man.
Sell it all. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Palantir Weekly Stream. This is number 29. Chris is not here, so he can't get mad at the bell. First of all, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. It's going to be a fun stream because we've got a lot to talk about. I've got Matt with me. My Wi-Fi probably sucks right now, so my picture's a little bit blurry, so give it like a minute or two. Should get back to normal. I've got Arnie with me as well. I've linked both their Twitters in the description. Arnie has a phenomenal Substack, pretty much dedicated to talking about Palantir, so I would definitely check out his Twitter and check out his Substack in his bio. Some of the most in-depth research I've seen on the pure financials and numbers of Palantir. So
yeah,
definitely everyone check it out. Yeah. And Matt has a YouTube channel where he posts videos at 11:59 p.m. and I get the notification and I check them out at 11:59 p.m. and I watch them.
So Amit, so I've been doing YouTube for 5 years and I've just never been able to amass a following like you have. That's one of those videos where your audience, specifically my audience, probably won't. But that's one of those videos that I feel like is going to linger around the internet for quite some time and just consistently build views over time. So
the Rocket Labs one?
No. The how to buy bonds on the Treasury Direct.
Yes. That one. I saw last night. Yes.
Yeah. So like my audience doesn't really care about bonds whatsoever, but it'll just be there, and people will be like, "Oh, I don't know."
I appreciate that because bonds for years have been completely ignored. I was one of the first ones actually hating bonds. I made my very first internship in fixed income government bond in the asset management in a company, and these bonds are useless. Why should I even think of investing in something that yields nothing and I have no perspective of gaining something? But now things are different.
Yeah. Sorry, man.
Well,
this is
speaking
not
of bonds, no, that's okay. Speaking of bonds, I'm going to transition to the macro a little bit. Guys, we have a lot of Palantir stuff to get to, so we'll get there in a second. But the 2-year and the 10-year bond curves inverted. 2-year offering Treasury bonds, 2-year offering you 4.1%, 10-year offering 3.68%. It's a little weird that it's still staying at that level on the 2-year, 10-year. Macro has been wiped out this week. S&P down to 367, almost tested the 360 lows of June. I'll start off with you, Arnie. What are you feeling about the macro right now? Are you on the side of there's more pain? Are you on the side of stocks are oversold and we're due for a rally? How did you feel about the Fed, CPI? Kind of your 2-3 minute summary of everything happened this week in the macro.
Well, first I would say my macro predictions are generally bad. I'm not deep into macro, so therefore I like to see the big pictures, and more importantly, given the big picture, okay, what I should consider, what I should absolutely avoid. For instance, what I should consider is, as we said before, all the fixed income curve was completely ignorable. Right now, with the Fed rising rates, and actually there has been a panic, real panic in the fixed income field. The VIX of the bonds called MOVE is spiking much more than the spike in the VIX. That tells you there is a real panic in the fixed income field. And generally, panic in the fixed income field is correlated also to what's happening to the currencies, because many bonds are kept as a reserve from other countries. So everything is very intertwined. On the fixed income field, there could be more panic, but I would say we are already in panic. The problem with having a fixed income in panic is that it can generate very easily panic in the equity market, because we have to think that everything in equity is valued according to how it is valued the fixed income. To value equity, you make as a reference fixed income, because equity is the riskier alternative than bonds. So if bonds have a certain yield, the equity, to make sense, needs to have a better yield. So if interest rates keeps rising and all the curve keeps rising and rising, the equity, to have a reasonable sense, must go lower and lower. So overall, I'm not really scared of the macro, especially if you think of, as an investor, you want to be invested in companies that can do well regardless of a macro. I'm actually scared that all this fear of a recession can actually trigger or even push a recession, because if people are so terrified, then they stop consuming. So I'm not scared of a recession per se. I'm scared if everything just keeps going crazy, then mentally you generate worse than probably the central bank wants to achieve, like rather than slowing down the consumption, just creating a tilt.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It seems like Fed Chair Jay Powell definitely kind of wants to induce the recession at the end of the day to get rid of inflation. Matt, you've been buying this week. Why are you buying? What stocks are you buying? And how are you thinking of the macro?
Well, I buy every week, but I'd just like to...
You buy every week.
Every week. When I have money, which I'm running out of. But just to I guess, add on to Arnie, I personally think we're already in a recession. I'm a firm believer that after 2 quarters consecutive of negative growth, that technically you are in a recession. But I think part of that needs to be recognized that 2020 and 2021, with all the money that was added, the fact that we didn't see more GDP or anemic growth coming out of, say, 2021 is pretty impressive, personally. But the reason why I'm buying is because exactly what Arnie kind of said. I'm more of an investor for the long term. And so I don't really focus too much on the short-term price swings unless it means that I'm going to continue to buy. What I will say is I am being humbled right now by where I thought the market was going to head. I thought that more folks would be, I guess, relieved at a 0.75 or 75 basis point hike. So the fact that we're kind of back down to the June lows was a little bit surprising to me. So I'm humbled by that because I did not anticipate we would get back down to the 360s. But what now I think, now that I've had a little bit of time to think about it, recognize that I was wrong in my previous predictions, my current thought process is, and I think this is what a lot of people are alluding to, until we see a true inflection point in inflation, and until we see the fact of the Fed come off of how hawkish they have been over the past 5 to 6 months, I think that we have opportunity to go down another 5 to 10% pretty easily. So I think that would put us close to the 335 range on the SPY or 3350 on the S&P. Is that where? But that being said, I think with the pain that we have seen and the 5 consecutive weeks of down since mid-August, I think we will see a slight relief over the next 1 or 2 weeks. And then historically, as Amit, you've posted 2 or 3 weeks ago, going into midterms, the market generally performs pretty well. And historically, 4Q is a strong quarter in a midterm year. And just generally, 4Q is always pretty strong regardless. Recent, I guess, notes against that was September to December 2018. But generally speaking, every other time I think about it, you always have Christmas rallies, and they always end up doing relatively well, including 2021. And then as soon as we got into January 1st, we started tanking like a crazy person. So macroeconomic, it's interesting, but for myself, somebody that's more of like a lifelong investor, I'm eating it up. I have some cash in my 401k. I moved a lot of that to be invested in the S&P 500 with this last big drawdown over the past 2-3 days. So
I think what's going to mess up inflation is when Avatar comes out, everyone's going to spend so much money buying tickets to the theaters, and we're just going to inflate the economy again, because I can't wait for that movie to come out. It's going to be super exciting. All right, Emmanuel's super chat. I missed that one because we were talking. Emmanuel, thank you for the super chat. He says, ask Arnie why you own so many Doge coins.
Because I got Doge donor.
Okay. So you are a Doge holder, is what you're saying.
I can say I'm a Doge holder because someone kindly forced me to have a wallet. Actually, I was interested in understanding what was a wallet without having the exchange, because when I first wanted to understand how crypto worked, I just tried Coinbase years ago, and there was this weird idea: why should I have a wallet rather than than an exchange?
Matt, did you ever buy Doge when it was rallying? Because I bought Doge. I'm sure you bought some Doge, right?
I don't think. I think at that time that was kind of
it was May 2021.
21. Yeah, I remember talking some people off the damn ledge. So I remember. So I'm no fortune teller, right? But to me, I was under the firm belief that the second half of 2021 we were going to enter crypto winter, and it delayed a little bit. So now I feel like we're in crypto winter. But there were some people that had told me, "Hey, we invested 10 grand." There was one woman that said, "We have 80 grand now," and I said, "Dude, like, even if you think it's going to the moon," I was like, "take some of that off the table." I was just like, "Where else you allocated?" And they were telling me like this is their only investment, and they'd love to. I was like, "What are your other dreams, right, for investments, right?" And they were like, "Well, we'd like to have a couple rentals one day," and I was like, boom. I was like, you got it. I was like, if you're 100% in Dogecoin, that's your only investment. You have 80 grand of Dogecoin. I was like, sell half of that at least. Take some profits. I was like, and put that 40 grand that you'll get from it into a down payment on a rental. I was like, and boom, you're halfway towards where your eventual goals will be. And so I think like sometimes we get so caught up in some of these hypes and crazes, diamond hands, that we kind of throw our goals and our initial plans out the window. And I think sometimes we need to relate back to that. But anyway, so I talked to like a couple people off the ledge, and I think at first, like, I think the woman's husband like wanted to strangle me because I think she sold half of it, and then she was really excited because that 40 grand that they kept ended up being like 20 grand a couple weeks later because it chopped in half pretty quick. And so she reached out to me and thanked me, and I haven't talked to her since, but I don't know if they ever bought the house, but they did take profit off the table.
Matt, let me jump in. I'd like to ask you a question, since
sure.
I feel like you have a long experience. Do you think the psychology of the investors is broken right now? With broken, I mean people are just not used to the fact that something can be that down that long. I ask you because I realized recently talking with some people that I'm already more experienced to the idea, okay, I'm down some 6 months, it's fine, everything will recover. But from what I see, there is often the expectation, no, everything just will rally. Is it the case, like the new investors can't really accept this?
I would say, because I'm by no means like I guess I don't want to, legend's not the right word, historic investor or like experience. I wouldn't consider myself a super experienced investor is what I'm trying to say, not legend. I've only been investing since like 2013. But to me, I've seen sideways markets. I've seen 2020. I saw 2018. And 2018, I'd say, was probably like before this, the more scary of the markets. The pandemic, I wasn't really all that scared because I felt like it would be short-lived. And then the Fed kind of came in and helped. I think what's really hurting 2018 people.
Similar?
Not to this extent. 2018 really only lasted from September 2018 to December 25th. And then from the 26th onward, it kind of rallied, and it kind of went from 2018 to the peak in 2020 before the pandemic. But I think what's really hurting people is because of the meme stocks, because of GameStop, because of AMC, because of the surgence and the ability for the retail investor to enter the market with such low cost of entry. We've had a lot of people that have had the opportunity to come in and invest small sums of money, which to most people that weren't investing before is large sums of money, because, you know, when you first start investing, $500 is a lot of money. Because of that ease of entry, I feel like you've had a lot of people enter in 2020, 2021 because of the craze. And because of how meteoric the rise was of 2020 and 2021, people are losing their minds. And I think a lot of people also they did so well in 2020, 2021 because of the interesting speculative nature of the market. So much money was going into it, coupled with a pandemic and the absurd growth into certain speculative growth stocks. They invested heavily into those things, anticipating that they'll never go down. And they didn't truly come in with normal, rational investing behaviors. And unfortunately, now they're coming off the back end of something that was irrational, which ends up also being irrational with respect to how quickly things have kind of gone awry and how far we've kind of come down and on the edge of quantitative tapering. So I think with that, it's caught a lot of people off surprise because they're not used to, say, sideways years like 2015 or slightly down years like 2011 or something of the like. And so I think that this is a great learning opportunity for people to recognize that it's not always like this. And it's also not always like 2020 and 2021. It's most of the time somewhere in between. And I think that if they can kind of learn that. What's that?
No, markets are tough. If they were easy, everybody would be rich by doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's and to transition, I mean, the markets are tough and you've got to make some outsized asymmetrical bets if you really want to make some big money in the markets, which transitions us to Palantir. So I think the biggest news of the day or of the week, and there's a lot to get into, but the interim update. I did not expect this. It was very interesting for Palantir CEO Alex KARP to put this out. Again, it's like this kind of poetic letter that's split into parts. It has this ending that like makes you think very deeply about what he's trying to say, almost esoteric to some extent. And he put it out. This came off of two other PRs that we'll talk about, but one of the PRs was that Palantir is a leader in artificial intelligence platforms in terms of the revenues and sales they've been able to generate, even beyond Microsoft and Google. So a couple of things that were interesting in this. Number one, he's been making the point that they are having 67% compounded annual growth in the United States. And we're going to look at some clips later of him talking about why the US is such a great place to be building software. That's one point in this letter. The other point here, Palantir having the most revenue in 2021 in terms of AI intelligence software sales. Obviously, other companies doing more in total sales, but AI in particular, that subset is what they're doing. And then a couple of these quotes were interesting. This is not about software. The construction of our world's artificial intelligence infrastructure and systems, which are used by special forces to target terrorists, for example, implicate the most intimate and challenging issues of public life, including the need to guard the rights of the individual against the state. He goes on to say democracy is fragile, basically referencing the Ukraine and Russia crisis, and says that instead of trying to automate human labor, we need to give humans the productive power, almost like give countries the productive power to be able to go against everyone else. He ended off by saying the most significant arms race of our time is to construct the next generation of AI. Our world's most vital institutions in both the commercial and defense sectors will not survive. We are building it. He also goes on to say that the TAM of the commercial sector is essentially unlimited. Really interesting letter. It makes you think that they're going to do well in Q3 earnings, because if putting out a letter like this and not hitting your numbers, it would be interesting. So let's start with you, Arnie. What were your reactions to this letter that came out?
I loved it, and I love how gradually the focus is going on the US, especially the commercial side. I noticed from the beginning of this year, when they posted the Q4 results, that was actually the first time that was available for us to understand exactly how strong it is the US compared with international sales and in what sector. Because from the split we were given, basically we could see that the government was like 70-80% US, while the commercial was basically all international. And that was surprising to me. And we see that gradually all the shift is going to the US commercial, which is where the big opportunity lies. And just to make a comparison, Palantir right now has less than 40% of the sales coming from the US commercial, despite the US commercial are like kind of be a half or more than the total commercial. While for companies like Snowflake, ServiceNow, but Snowflake in particular, the US is 80% of the sales. So rather than targeting directly the most profitable, the biggest market, Palantir went first in the international, and then gradually now that the market is weak, they're pushing hard. And I'm excited for this because actually that tells me that what we think, they are bad capital allocators, in reality, with the resources they have, they are pushing in the right time with the right effort. And actually, I was surprised of seeing that in regarding of the AI sales, the platforms, actually Palantir is that advanced compared with Microsoft, Google, and so on, which means that they're basically only focused on the infrastructure to make SaaS run, but they're not focused on, okay, guys, we need to sell AI platforms, which makes us think, okay, it means that Palantir is really penetrating that field, is not a monopoly. But if we think that little tiny Palantir has been able to go through that, despite there are such big players in the space, that actually tells me, okay, guys, probably when we think Palantir is crap in marketing and whatever, is probably us not fully grasping what the hell they're doing, because
But
the reality
does the AI
they're
stuff
penetrating it.
Does the AI stuff deny any of the fact that their go-to-market is still not that strong? Like, yes, they beat Microsoft in AI sales, but they still have some issues in overall sales.
They have some issues, but I would say if their go-to-market was completely bad, as we often perceive, they wouldn't be there. And actually that tells you, well, those are the stats for 2021. Maybe the 2022 are different. Maybe all these giants already woke up, and if Microsoft wants to really sell something with the distribution they have, they can easily double or triple that amount.
Matt, your thoughts on this letter? How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel fuzzy inside with butterflies?
It did make me feel fuzzy. It made me feel really great, and I felt no. I'm just kidding. But
it's true. I was at a Subway in a Walmart when the letter dropped, and I'm reading this shit like, KARP. It's awesome.
I would say I was pleasantly surprised, and very much like you, Arnie. Like I was surprised at how much market share in terms of AI that Palantir had. Not only that, but it's a substantial part of Palantir's revenue. And comparatively to, say, Microsoft and the others that were on the list, very small portion of their revenue. Yeah. So it also gets you to think, if Palantir is going to continue, say, the 60% US commercial growth rate, or even a 25 to 30% overall revenue growth rate, a lot of that is going to continue in the AI space. And so my thought process is how dominant will Palantir be in this AI space, which to me kind of was a very big surprise because of my personal usage bias with the product. Although I recognize the digital twin aspect of some of the things that they do within oil and gas because I use the product there, I never really considered it as like an AI product, if that makes any sense. So yes, I recognize there's an AI aspect to some of the things that we utilize Palantir for within our company.
For instance,
but overall, this is very surprising to me.
Where the AI comes into play, like if you can, like very broadly, but when we speak about AI in Palantir, what should we expect?
I don't really know all too much about the AI aspect of things. All I know is that what we try to use, we have a lot of facilities, right? Whether they're floating in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, I'll just be blunt. I won't say too much about what I do, but floating in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico where we're producing oil and gas, you're trying to create a digital twin of basically building out that facility in the digital world and understanding how things can react, whether it's different conditions that are occurring or what have you. And so I anticipate that while I just assume that as like data analytics and the like, when you're building out a digital twin, technically it's artificial intelligence to help you understand how things would react in specific areas or certain weather storms. Like there's hurricanes entering the Gulf right now. How would you potentially optimize being able to shut in the facilities to be able to make sure that everyone's safe and gets off the facilities? Things like that, which you can then react in, say, a digital twin versus trying to run tests on the actual facility itself, which would result in downtime, loss of production, loss of revenue, stuff of the like. You can do that in the digital world. So I could see where that might be useful in a Boeing, an Airbus, and a lot of places where you're able to build these digital twins to build simulations that would allow you to, anyway, that's going down a huge rabbit hole. But the thing that I think was surprising to me was how large of a percentage it is of Palantir's 2021 revenue. And
basically
2021 revenue was
90%.
1.5. Yeah, 22 rev was 1.5 bill. This was 1.32. It was like 80%.
Yeah. So huge. It's like,
basically tells everything they sell has some aspects of AI incorporated in it. I think also the fact that when users use the platform, basically they are feeding the platform, and the platform actually learns how to make things better. There was one interview related to Hyundai, I think, that where Shyam said, well, it was written, but he said that the goal of Palantir is not, this is the data platform, here you are, boom, go, but actually to make users use the platform, like perform their own decisions, like how they normally make, but by making decisions over decisions, actually Palantir learns how to improve and the experience of the users. I think that's why we have so much revenues from AI compared with the total, basically all of it, because every product they do has this feedback loop incorporated into. That's my speculation.
I agree. Let's look at this super chat by Brian. Do you think Palantir is in talks with I think you meant the government, given the China risk? Thank you, Mitt, for the consistency with Pod. Will Sachin be back on soon? Sachin is doing some work experiments, so he'll hopefully be back soon, but he's under a lot of work right now. But the China question is interesting. So let's look at a clip of Palantir's KARP speaking about China in the recent CNBC interview, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we think is going on with China.
You just mentioned China. Is there a lesson that you think the Chinese are learning about war and about, to the extent that they're thinking about the future of Taiwan and how that may relate to what's happening in Ukraine?
Every country in the world, including China, and they're like, we should never underestimate our adversaries. These are some of the most interesting, formidable, and creative, intelligent, wise cultures in the world. And they are very much, again, looking at what their expectation was and what was reality. The expectation was probably this last month, maximal, and reality. And then they're, I'm sure, looking at, we're spending gazillions, they're spending a lot less. What is special about what they're doing that's allowing them to massively outperform? And again, in a much less relevant context, why is tech dominated by America? It's like, well, there are all these reasons you have to understand. And with 100% certainty, every country in the world that is big is saying, holy, we thought we could just win because we're big. If the people are willing to fight to die, and if they have very specialized, not very costly software and other products and kinetic weapons, tanks, but not really the big ones, they can outperform us and grind us into the dust.
It's a really interesting thing. I mean, KARP is talking the way he was talking with Kevin Warsh in the Stanford interview in January, that like if they create a superpower in the form of software for smaller countries, it scares the bigger countries. And if Ukraine actually pulls it off and really does win, I mean, it's incredibly interesting. So Matt, let me get your thoughts first. How do you feel about the China-Taiwan situation from the perspective of if you were KARP thinking about it? And do you think there's a real potential here that Palantir can sell the vision of the David beating the Goliath, even if they don't have nuclear weapons, for example? It's more political, right?
Yeah, it's very political. I think it's a very similar situation to Ukraine, though. So it's not too dissimilar, which is obviously why we're talking about it. I think that because Taiwan is a U.S. ally, I wouldn't be surprised if Palantir does have the opportunity to work with them. Whether or not that is so, the one thing that I don't understand and that I wish I could know a little bit more of is at what point did Palantir assist with Ukraine? Right? Was it once the war kind of got off the ground, or have they been working with Ukraine for some time? And I don't know the answer to that, right? I just don't. But if my curiosity is if the same thing would happen, would there need to be a conflict within Taiwan or between Taiwan and China that would, say, start a similar situation, like a war, before Palantir steps in and assists Taiwan? That's where I kind of am. I don't know the answer to that. So if somebody could allow me or like let me know, like, oh no, Palantir's been working with Ukraine since 2020 or 2021 or something of the like, because we literally just saw the first interactions with Chris pointed it out, and I saw later the tweet from the Lithuanian president, their initial connection with KARP when folks were in New York recently. I think it was New York, but that first interaction, right? So now maybe Lithuania is saying, hey, like, let's get this up and running in our country because we're fearing that we're going to be attacked next. So I don't know, because I know sorry, I'm like kind of going off the cuff. I don't really necessarily have an answer for you, but I know that security is a very big piece for Palantir, right? They just don't want anybody to have it. They're not going to work with the Russians. They're not going to work with the Chinese. They're not going to probably work with India. They're going to be working with Western countries and countries that are aligned with the West. So that means Japan. That means, other countries that are aligned with the West. So that could mean Taiwan. But at what point do they actually establish that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I don't know if KARP talks so bluntly on national television about this stuff at the intersection of their software if he doesn't think they have a really big shot to help. I mean, maybe he doesn't. Maybe this is marketing for him, but I don't know. Sometimes the level of conviction someone speaks with that we can make a small country a superpower, philosophically even, and then from a sales perspective on the software, it's interesting. Arnie, how are you considering the Taiwan stuff, and do you think Palantir will play a role over the next 5 years in a lot of these geopolitical situations?
Look, I would start from exactly what you just said, that he's trying to convince, but not trying to convince. And I will connect with the interview the speech he made at Zurich. He said one very interesting sentence saying, I don't want to convince. I give you the facts. I tell you why I do this, how I do this, and I let you convince yourself. This is what KARP is doing. He is providing the facts. He is sharing the philosophy, and implicitly he's selling, but he's not there selling the product. Taiwan is in a similar situation, but in a bigger scale, because the strategical role of Taiwan is bigger, and the adversary here would be 100 times bigger. Therefore, it is important to give a signal for China, actually, that even a small country can defend itself if well equipped by heroism and software helping target that heroism. And that is actually a clear message to all the countries around Taiwan. Maybe in Taiwan, they can't really sell it directly, because imagine that China comes and take it over. It would automatically absorb also that, I think. But for sure, all the countries around, meaning Japan, South Korea, Australia have an incredible pressure right now to monitor everything, because if China happens to take Taiwan, that changes the geopolitical equilibrium also for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, it sounds like Palantir's trying to be a warmongering company or anything, but like, I think KARP is just speaking about the real reality that shit might go down. And if shit does go down at that point, there's got to be a company that's willing to step up and provide the superpower. And the Ukraine situation is going to let us know in a couple of months, like what really is going on and what role Palantir played. I want to play another clip that was very interesting. This is KARP talking on the declining stock price and how employees are feeling. And he gave an interesting answer that I think I feel like I've been saying this for the past couple of months as well about the stock price. So let's listen to what he said here.
We're talking about employment and labor. In terms of your employment and being able to hire talent, what are you seeing right now?
Look, bad
how
times.
easy or hard it is. Plus, by the way, I imagine there are a lot of employees sitting looking at the stock price saying, I'm underwater, or I have half of what I thought I had.
Well, look, we built Palantir. We were private for almost 16 years, and our share price on the non-private market was going down. So, like, these times, in the end, bad times help us also because the alternatives end up being like, our main competition is I want to be a cockroachholder.com who recruits our people. That's our actual competition. A startup that is 2 days away from failing. But
what was your reaction when you first heard that the first time?
I was driving home and I was almost got in a car accident because I was laughing so hard.
Wow. Arnie, what was your first reaction?
Same, but it's like what actually KARP said in the last conference call, but it was among so many things that we didn't understand how deeply he loves cockroaches. Because there he said exactly this: rather than join us, a lot of people, a lot of talents were joining insect.com, enjoying life while being 2 days from failing.
It was good. It was good commentary by him.
Engineers don't know it. Those companies aren't getting funding. And so, like, instead of going to mycockroachtrap.com, people are like, yeah, the stock is down, we're doing crazy important things, and the alternatives suck.
Do you see, in terms of clients, though, right now, spending, I mean, on the corporate side and even on the government side, given what's happening in the economy?
We see a big difference between U.S. and, to be frank, probably too frank, the U.S. is just completely different than everywhere else. Our U.S. business has grown 67% a year the last 3 years, from 233 million to just over $1 billion. The rest of the world, people react. Americans, for all of our foibles, we react to bad times by rolling up our sleeves and adapting. The rest of the world has trouble with adapting at the pace we adapt. So yes, our business is being negatively afflicted by the inability to in other countries to adapt the way we adapt in America. On the other hand, we're an 18-year-old business. The last 3 years, the American segment is growing 67%, despite me as a front man. So it's like, maybe if we have a more successful front man, we can even, I'm not planning to go anywhere, but it's like we're despite or because of our various disabilities, we're growing 67% a year in the most important, most interesting market in the world. And yes, we are not growing that way in Germany and France and other places. And I don't expect to grow that way. I do think there'll be a handoff. What I think is going to happen is we're going to have a couple years of terrible times. Those companies that are most robust will survive and thrive.
Okay, so a couple interesting points. Number one, this argument about the cockroach is basically saying engineers are going to get a bunch of equity that's crappy equity from startups that aren't really doing anything important in the world. So if you're looking at your stock price, you got your options at 15, and because you joined last year when the stock was like 30, and now the stock's at 7. So immediately you're like, okay, so should I leave to go to a startup where I'm going to get more valuable equity because the stock price isn't cut in half? And then you realize, wait a second, what work am I going to be doing there? Is there going to be any value to the work I'm doing? Is there going to be any purpose? And at the end of the day, the best people who have all the options in the world, they want to do something where they find purpose. That's why they kind of come to Palantir. So I think that argument was it was spot on. It was like, look, you're looking at the stock price. You're a really smart engineer. Yeah, it's down. We will survive these next 2 years. The other companies probably won't. You'll be doing something meaningful. And we're growing 67% in one of the world's biggest economies. And so if you give it some time, in the next 2 years, not only will the stock price be up, but you'll be more happier in life because you worked on something that mattered. Arnie, what was your kind of analysis from what you took from that video?
Well, first, I'm scared when KARP says something negative, like he was negative on the Ukrainian conflict. Well, I learned when KARP speaks, we'd better listen when it comes to macroeconomic things, because he has better sensors than we have. And he speaks about being ahead of 2 years of terrible economic situation. That tells something. And of course, he has the incentive actually to say things in a more negative way, because they are in the position of strength, both because they actually solve problems, corporate problems, government problems, and because actually they are the ones with a big cash pile sitting there ready to exploit the opportunity. So that was really interesting for me. Overall, I think Palantir has been preparing for this, because otherwise they should have exploited more the cash they had, rather than, it seems, the fact of building the cash, this famous 2.4 billion, actually was a strategical choice to signal, hey guys, the companies where we were working were actually burning cash before, are burning more cash now, but that is not the growth you had before. Rising more cash would require a lot of dilution. We are cash positive in terms of free cash flow. We have the war chest. This actually tells already a lot of the quality of the company. And that actually, among the many things that having a lot of cash has in terms of optionality, actually gives a strong signal.
Matt, your reaction to that part of the interview?
I think it just goes to show that true companies aren't necessarily, that are trying to build and will eventually become some of the largest companies that we can trust after, aren't necessarily focused on the share price. If you look at, say, Costco, for example, they're just focused on getting great customer experiences, the membership's up, and having a good old time. They're not focused on 100% dollar pinching here, penny pinching there. They treat their employees with respect. They want everyone to be happy. They're looking for the great customer experience. Apple, they're trying to drive great tools that people can use in their day-to-day life. Look at Tesla, for example. They're just trying to change how EVs are perceived within the world and try to make it possible. They're not focused on the share price. And I think a lot of times what ends up killing companies is the short-term mindset thinking that a lot of them have, which is, and I experience this, trust me, on a day-to-day basis. I'm doing this literally right now over the past 2 to 3 weeks of preparing, what are we going to make next quarter? My problem is, it's like, if you haven't put action plans, like, you have to think, some of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis are year-long wavelengths to get a well in the ground when you're dealing with deep shore or deep water offshore wells. It's like, if you're honestly worrying about what you're doing next quarter and have to report, it's like, to me, what's more meaningful is I'd rather spend my time focusing on how I can move the dial in the next 3, 4, 5 years than what I can do next quarter. The next quarter things are going to happen because you have the opportunity to be reactive or proactive, and you know what you're doing as a day-to-day business. But by the time next quarter comes around, it's already been in the works. Like, you think about what Palantir is doing, that 67% annualized revenue growth wasn't because they're like, ooh, how can we close one big customer next month? It's how can we get into as many industries as possible within the United States commercial market, dominate it, and then grow our sales team and exponentially thereafter. So it's not like let me get this client, let me get this client, let me get this client. It's let's get an entire industry together. Let's knock down this industry. Let's knock down this industry. And then eventually we'll scale up. To me, like, that's just being strategic. That's just good business. That's making sure that you can walk before you can run. And I meant to ask you this earlier, but it wasn't an opportune time, Amit. But now I think this is perfect. Let me ask you a question, because you're a founder and you created a business 2 years ago. Would you have tried to run before you could walk with Audia and try to get it out to the people before it was ready? And the answer was probably no. But I'm curious if you can kind of relate to that as a founder yourself, as to taking a systematic, pragmatic approach to getting your product out there before you're trying to run before you can walk. So anyway, spinning the table around.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I'll give you even a better answer. There are certain features we can't release because we have to prioritize other things. It's like, people want a dark mode on the app. It's like, that's amazing, but there's some other stuff that's way more important than a dark mode. And it's like, we're going to piss off some people. So, but you have to have a plan and a strategy. It's like, does a dark mode matter right now? Or does making sure that you can increase the speed of the audio, which is like probably more functional and useful matter? It took us 4 months to get our first MVP out, and that MVP wasn't amazing, but it was functional. And then you reiterate as it goes from there. But if you put something out where it doesn't make sense, it's not part of the plan, it's not part of the strategy.
So let me ask you another question. If somebody were to offer you $1 million today, would you walk away from the company?
No.
Why
because
not? It's $1 million.
Well, $1 million is cool, but what's cooler is right. It's not that it's a billion versus a million. It's like, where do you see the potential and purpose? And I think that's where I agree with you. KARP is playing the long game. When he said this company can be 20 times bigger in October 2021, he didn't say that because it was a bull market. He said that because he genuinely believes we will be in every single vertical of every single part of the economy if we figure this out. Which is why would you take a $20 billion buyout from Oracle when you could have your Class F shares, run this to the moon, and actually become a $200-300 billion company? And so I think he's playing the long game.
If they were they're an 18-year-old company, if they were focused on getting as many sales as possible, do you honestly think it would have taken this long to hire this many salespeople? And do you think that Peter Thiel would still have him at the head of being CEO if he was honestly not following the appropriate path that was in front of him? And so to me, it's not about the share price. Yes, the share price is a result of what's going on in the company, but I think the continued problem that a lot of people have is you're finding this quagmire of people that are trying to trade Palantir because of the meme stockness that it kind of had from the late part of 2020 into 2021, when it went from $15 a share all the way to 41, and then all the way back down. Then you had the people like myself that have been involved in it since 2016, 2017, from a stakeholder's perspective, buying into it in 2020 because now they had the ability to buy the public shares and are now being like, I know where this thing potentially could head. It could go to zero potentially, but to me, that $10,000 that I put on day one of it being directly public listed, I was like, to me, I could lose this $10,000 and not be that upset about it. But I personally thought that $10,000 would grow to $100,000 very easily, and that was more likely of a scenario based off of my conviction. And I think that is what KARP feels. I feel like that's what most Palantirians feel. And I'll get off my soapbox.
I agree. And some real quick, I was going to say, some people are going to like Palantir, some people are not going to like Palantir. I think there's a little analogy we can use from the chat. We have Mr. Tom Nash who's joined the chat. Have no fear, Tom is here. And we have one comment that says, we want Nash. Another comment that says, Tom Nash sucks. And like, that's Palantir, right? Like, we love Palantir, we hate Palantir. At the end of the day, are you playing the long game with the company? Are you bullish overall at the end of the day of where it's going? And if you are, then you're going to stick with it for the long term. Arnie, go ahead.
There's controversy even inside the community. But the question is, do you think the Palantir price, if it didn't become a meme in back then, where would it go? Like, where would it be right now if all of that crazy euphoria didn't happen? Would it be much different from where it is right now?
I think it'd probably be higher. I think it'd still be close to $10.
I'm not sure about that, but well, we will never know.
Let's go to the next piece of news here. The Hyundai heavy industry news. So we've got this one. This was big news. Palantir announced, this was a couple of days ago, a major expansion of its partnership with South Korea's Hyundai Heavy Industries Group by bringing Palantir Foundry to additional companies with the conglomerate. Korea's shipbuilding and offshore engineering will utilize Palantir Foundry across its shipbuilding subsidiaries. For those who don't know, HHI basically is the largest shipping manufacturer really in the world. A lot of it happens in South Korea. Palantir initially had a $25 million partnership with them in January. We didn't hear much for 8 months. Apparently they were in the pilot phase, and now they have extended that partnership for $45 million over 5 years. So it's going to be about $9 million a year. And this is interesting because basically Foundry is going to be utilized to do a lot of interesting things for them. So they said, Alex KARP says, Hyundai Heavy is an industry leader working at the leading edge of some of the most complex engineering challenges that we collectively face. We cannot be more enthusiastic about expanding our partnership and are actively working to extend our software offerings. During the successful pilot phase, shipbuilding teams use Foundry to improve architectural designs of ships, ensure quality on production lines, and bring the power of big data analysis to standard safety procedures. Start with Matt. You work with Palantir software literally at your job. How did you feel about this platform approach to Hyundai Heavy Industries?
I get it. So I think when people are thinking Hyundai, they're probably thinking the cars and Genesis and things of the like. What I think they don't recognize is Hyundai builds big facilities and platforms. So some of my friends have actually been in Korea building things at the Hyundai Heavy Industries yard in Busan. I don't know. I could see how it could help with creating great dashboards and analytical dashboards. But what I don't really understand so much, maybe if they're doing a lot of pressure testing and temperature sensor testing and stuff of the like, I could see where it relates and how I'm trying to just like relate it to what I do on a day-to-day basis and how they could use it. But what I struggle with is, I guess, anyway, I can understand from their perspective why it's useful, and being able to gather data and be able to use different things in terms of construction. I'm just trying to understand if they use it to the extent that I would. I'd have to dig more. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Arnie, your thoughts on this partnership?
I do love when I see one client gradually expanding. Honestly, I didn't expect Hyundai to be this big. If a company is going to actually spin off a sub company, it means that it's already way bigger. And from what I understand, it actually also doesn't, tell me if I'm wrong, actually belongs to Hyundai, right? Because it was mentioned there in that press release. So I would underline that one of these players like Hyundai is like gathering 10 clients altogether. Because actually they generate 10, let's say they have 10 subsidiaries, it's like having 10 clients. But what's more important of these huge clients is that if we think of Palantir having a network, having one of these clients actually creates an exponential curve of possible interactions with its further suppliers and customers. So you get one client, implicitly you generate 1,000 interactions. And the interactions is what Palantir needs right now to expand its network, basically.
Yeah, I agree. To me, it's more of the platform approach, right? It's similar to a lot of the other deals they're doing with companies where if they become the premier shipyard platform, the subcontractors and different subsidiaries that work in the shipbuilding space and the ship decomposing space, because decomposing ships is a whole other challenge in and of itself. If all of them are using Palantir Foundry, like 45 million is really nothing, but the future deals based upon them being that modern operating system, that's what was exciting for me. And when I dug into this back in January, it was so interesting because it's like South Korea and this new niche, but then we just hadn't heard of it for like 8 months really, and then it finally came back. So super unique from there. Another clip I want to look at as well is, well, two things. So first, I want to show the president of the Republic of Lithuania who met with Palantir. He said, met with Palantir Tech representatives in New York. IT talent pool, infrastructure, and resilient economy make Lithuania a perfect spot for foreign IT companies to invest and grow. We also know Palantir worked with them in the Ukrainian refugee crisis, thanks to Ether Square that had some backlinks, and it was then explained publicly that they're working together. So that was an interesting thing. And then we have here KARP talking about if a recession is coming.
Do you see a recession coming around the globe? Do you see a recession coming here?
I don't know. It's very hard at all. A lot of that's definitional. But what I do see is that people are scared about energy outside of America. They're so scared about the macro political conditions that no one wants to talk about them. Their enterprises are built for a static, unified world of peace. And the balance sheets obviously are not often prepared for what's going to happen, which I think is going to be pretty bad the next couple of years, politically, economically. And then also, that's actually the real problem you have in tech.
Do you see a recession?
Thoughts on that, and thoughts on what he said about energy, and if you think Palantir is going to play a role there.
Who first?
Well, I would start.
Arnie, go ahead.
As we mentioned, when KARP says something, we need to think how informed this speaker is. And I would say KARP, despite he doesn't operate in all the sectors directly, he has insights from all the leaders in the world of what is really happening that is not actually shared to us. And what he says about the energy in Europe, I can tell you, is true. People are really scared. Probably it will soften because as we see, the energy prices are slightly decreasing, especially in the oil space. There will be a solution for that. But up to now, the climate is of uncertainty. And as we also KARP said, Europe is not that fast in adapting. So when KARP speaks of something macro, I listen because he's an informed player. What can we do actually as investors is, is our companies actually set to strive even if really bad times happen? And with Palantir, I found a company where I know that the worst that can happen is, okay, doesn't grow that much now because it's like you want to give them the medicine, and until the clients don't really feel the pain, it's like, no, medicine is costly. But if the pain really spikes, you have no alternative than taking the medicine.
Matt, your thoughts?
I think the energy piece is very true for not necessarily for the United States. I think the United States is somewhat energy independent. It's not necessarily as reliant as Europe and say the needs for energy. And I think that while crude oil prices might decline from here, natural gas prices, I think over the coming months would still be challenged pretty dramatically, especially as we get into the colder months. But I think, to me, the recession piece is inevitable. I agree a lot with what he says later on, which is many companies will go defunct, or maybe he said it in that clip, I'm not sure, but many companies might go defunct. And I think about the companies that have had the ability to weather the storm with respect to keeping cash on hand, like Palantir, like Google, like Apple. And my biggest thought, maybe not necessarily specifically for how Palantir will fare, but how any of these companies will deploy that capital when the time is right, because that's when you see the most deals and, I guess, war chests truly made, is the ability to selectively purchase things and discount prices, kind of like what we've seen. And the fact that we, in all honesty, haven't seen more of that might be one reason, actually, now that I'm thinking about it aloud, is while we've seen some of these companies decrease by 80 to 90% in terms of their share price, they also, some of them increased by several hundreds of percent. And so they still, in some cases, might be overvalued. Now I think the majority of them have become more appropriately valued. But the companies that don't have good revenue streams are going to be challenged, like the Zooms of the world and several other companies that were truly dependent on the explosive growth that they saw during the pandemic. But anyway, I'm more curious about who's going to make a very radical investment going forward, like Amazon did in 15 or 16 with Whole Foods. Who's going to make something very radical like that? Who's going to spend their $100 billion war chest appropriately, and what will they use it for? And that's kind of where my head goes. I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but it keeps me thinking. It's just like, what's going to be the next aha moment? Because initially Amazon buying Whole Foods is like, why the hell would Amazon buy Whole Foods? And now it kind of sinks into their broader strategy, and you're like, makes sense, right? But
any speculation?
I've been thinking, man, and I can't come up with it. Originally, because I work in oil and gas and my bias is that, I originally thought that maybe a Google or Amazon or Apple with their $100 billion would buy some of these oil companies and use some of that cash flow from operations. Because you have Shells and Exxons and BPs of the world that make $20 to $30 billion of cash flow. When you look at it from a price to cash flow from operations perspective, dirt cheap that you could pick these things up. Like Shell, for example, is going to make $50 billion in cash flow from operations this year, and they're trading at like $150 billion market cap. So within 3 years, they'd be able to buy back all the shares on the open market and become like this independently owned sort of company, which I think is pretty interesting. Comparatively to say how the rest of the companies on, say, the NASDAQ or so trade, which you could say even Google's cheap at how much they're trading at, considering how much cash they throw out. But anyway, that was my original thought. But now I'm thinking, based off of how much people are trying to reduce emissions and carbon footprint, they wouldn't want to burden their carbon intensity of their companies associated with those oil and gas companies. Maybe you could see them buying like a big renewables company, like an Ørsted or something like that, where there's a lot of running room for offshore wind. And I could see a lot of synergies associated with what they do from a data analytics perspective, or just computer science perspective on how to maximize the efficiency of those sort of operations. So anyway, sorry for the tangent.
Okay, I have one last clip I wanted to show about nuclear wars, because when you invest in Palantir, you have to speak on nuclear wars. Where is this clip? Okay, I think this is the one. This is where we're going to end it off. So this is Russia-Ukraine, since we've not really talked about that specifically. So let's look at that one.
Last time we saw you in Aspen, and prior to that in Davos. In some ways, you called this in terms of this potential threat. So where are we really at this point?
Well, it was a pleasure to talk to you then, and a pleasure to talk to both of you now. When we were talking about the reality that nuclear weapons are on the table 3 and 2 months ago, of course, that was derided. The general belief I had just comes from building a software business and seeing software in action in war, where software plus heroism can really slay the giant. And I know the Russians just underestimated the power of kinetic plus software plus heroism. And then I believe it's a zero-sum game in Russia, and there is no ability for Putin to lose. He can't just fail at war and then retire, which is what we're used to in democracy. Politicians fail and then we have another politician. And so the reason why I was sounding the alarm at Davos, and then again when we talked to much derision, was simply this combination of American software, the way we build software, plus a kind of heroism that is very unusual, would outperform the giant of spend. And that leads to just this jarring reaction. And we don't want to believe in the West that people would be zero-sum.
We lost our host.
He really meant when he said he was going to end it there and
I disagree.
end this video.
Bye-bye.
He keeps saying zero sum. Arnie, can you give some light on what you think that means?
I thought about it, and I haven't the full picture, honestly, because in wars, generally, well, if someone wins, the other loses. It's hard to think win-win here, especially given how much Putin exposed himself. And what's the victory for Russia is getting Ukraine. What's the victory for Ukraine is actually having still a Ukraine that is still there. So their bet is actually much bigger for Ukraine. I would say I haven't the full answer on what KARP meant on the zero-sum game. I would have liked him to explain it better.
Ryan has the best answer. Zero sum equals 0 to 1. There we go. That's KARP means the fight is for Ukraine is all or nothing. I think that's also the case. Go ahead, Matt.
Because
I think what they mean is, yeah, I think
win, the other loses, and in a non-zero sum game, you can have multiple winners. So I turn to you the question: can we have a situation where both party wins?
You talking to me or Amit?
I think all of us. I think that's what KARP wanted. He wanted us to make Russia feel as if they won and let Ukraine actually win without Russia being like, we're going to nuke you because I'm mad. Right?
Yeah. So I think what the whole last piece, I've listened to it now 2 or 3 times. The thing that I think that I kind of sum it up as is we've backed Putin into a corner. He can't lose because obviously that means he loses confidence from the people for him to be an ability to lead, because obviously it was a slam dunk for Russia to have taken over Ukraine. And obviously they've been able to ward them off for the past 6 months and actually to some been losing against Ukraine. Now they kind of talk about it in the discussion, and exactly what you talked about, Arnie, is like what's winning to Russia versus what's winning to Ukraine. It was very much like what happened in Vietnam with the United States. Like Vietnam, the United States was literally just fighting in a little conflict to them, so it didn't necessarily matter all too much, whereas the Vietnamese were fighting for their lives. And it's a very similar situation in Ukraine. It's just like, well, Russia doesn't need to take over Ukraine. There's no real reason for it. And so when you think about games, you think about war, you think about everything, Ukraine, like you said, Arnie, is a very life or death situation. And he talks, as you mentioned, like you have to make it seem as though even though they lost, they didn't lose. And that's the goal of, say, the politicians. And what I think he means by zero-sum game is for America, if this were, say, America versus Ukraine, and somehow we were trying to take over, it wouldn't matter, because at the end of the day, after 4 years, we get elected a new president, right? Whereas in Russia, while he's called a president, he's more of like a czar, and he's kind of going to be in power until they allow him not to be in power. And while they claim they have a democracy and a democratic system, do they actually? And so it's more so run by the wealthy and the rich, and it's run very differently than, say, the United States is. Granted, the United States isn't a perfect system either, and there's a lot of corruption associated with it as well, just like the rest of the world. But we've seen, people lose, and then the powers change at B, and there's time that passes by. Whereas in Russia, it's kind of like you're there until you kind of get taken out. And it's the same thing with China, right? I mean, you're kind of there until you get taken out and somebody takes over. Whereas the United States, we have a system set up where, you get elected, you're there for 3 to 4 years. Once you get elected again, you're there for another 3 to 4 years. That's your max. And then if, unfortunately, you don't get reelected, then somebody else gets in power. So it's almost just like things can change because it's meant to change every 4 years. and every 2 years, I guess, if you're talking about midterms. But
Right.
But yeah, you don't have that similarity, and that's why I think they're talking about how it's a zero-sum game, and it's a lot more of a dire consequence if Russia loses because they don't have that ability to change over power. I mean, Putin's been in charge for 20 years, so.
I agree. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think that's wrapping up the end of our pod. We had a KARP interview this week. We had Hyundai news. We had AI news. KARP has done the Swiss democracy little keynote he gave. He's been pretty active. He's been out there. He's been getting the word out. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on Q3 earnings. It seems like the company's positioning themselves to show a decent quarter, given how public they're being, because they weren't this public before Q2. And I guess we'll see how it ultimately plays out.
When the hell are they going to announce NHS, man?
So I think September 26th, we're getting somewhat of an update. Someone tweeted
because
that.
I thought they were supposed to do something last week. Then somebody said they're going to do something this week, and then I heard
We're trolling.
September. Then I heard early October. So I don't know what the hell to believe.
If we don't get this contract, it's going to suck. But I think we're getting it.
Well, I also don't know how to read the website, right? Because I'm sure you see the website piece, but it's like the website's like kind of hinting that, oh, hey, we helped with the vaccines, with the NHS, but that it's also hinting at more than just the vaccines, if you've seen that. So I don't know what to believe. But I do want to throw in a disclaimer. I talked a little bit about Russia, the conflict. I'm not a geopolitical expert by any means. And so I don't mean to offend anybody.
Yes, he is.
It's my...
he analyzes geopolitics for a living.
It's my silly American point of view, and it's a lot more complex than I give credit to. And I recognize how it might seem an American complaining or discussing geopolitical issues when I have zero skin in the game might seem insensitive. And so I hope that it doesn't seem that way. I'm literally to discuss it just based off of a Palantir context. So.
Okay.
If I can just add one thing, I would underline how many things are actually work in progress. We had kind of many months of quiet, and now it seems like Palantir is participating to all the events in the world. There's a nice guy on Twitter who tags us Lord. Sorry, I don't remember the full Twitter account, but it seems like Palantir went from being not considered at all. Like Palantir is not considered a defense contractor because it never appears in the cluster there. He's not considered a SaaS contractor. He's a SaaS company. Nobody includes Palantir there. No, very little events. And now in this little time, we see a lot of KARP interviews. We see a lot of events. We even see advertising on YouTube. So it's like they were on the break for many months, and now it's like, okay, full gas. So I do hope to see this flywheel actually spinning fast and fast. And sooner or later, we will see actually what all of this will bring. But as always, Palantir is B2B, also with government. Big contracts take a long time.
I agree. And we're going to see if that flywheel hits off. Gabe, by the way, in the chat, he's a Palantir Bill. He has a new channel, so you guys can check him out. He is jealous of Matt being so well spoken. So
I'm jealous of Gabe because you let him in during your weekly streams. You don't let me on. You let Gabe on.
Matt, you have never asked once to be on the lately streams. Second,
no, I just sit there hoping that you love me one day enough to have me and Gabe finally introduce each other on the stream. Or did I have the opportunity to meet with Gabe? I don't think I
have. You have. I don't think you have.
So I do admire the guy. He's very intelligent. So
when you come on late night, we don't always talk about stocks. We get into some other topics. I get to know. I want Matt Money's love life. I get deeper into.
You haven't heard Pillow Talk with Matty Mullah.
There we go.
Yeah, Matty Mullah gets a little deep.
All right, I love it. Thank you everybody for joining us, spending your late night on a Fridays with us. In 5 years, hopefully, as a community, we will be sitting on some pretty decent gains, remembering 5 years ago we were theorizing about this crazy company at 12 a.m. On Friday nights, which is which is crazy. You know, it's the beginning of a community, and it's really cool to be part of a community because communities, they help you give some purpose in life. Palantrillion right at the end. Meanwhile, Jay not even in the weekly. Jay, you know you're welcome whenever to be on. So let us know when you want to be on.
All
right, everybody.
Are built in tough times.
Well, Cam says we'll be an alley in a dumpster, which is another possibility with our Palantir shares. So the thing about life, right, is that the unknown is what makes it exciting. And so we don't know where we're going to be in 5 years.
Stating that, I've had people in the past get very upset because I have been a big advocate of Palantir since they've directly public listed. And I think some people just need to recognize how big of a position they have and make sure that they're managing their risk appropriately. We talk very bullishly about this company. I have a lot of conviction in this company. And I think I've mentioned it on this before. I think it's less than well, now that the market's kind of gone down, it might be closer to 5 or 6% of my portfolio, but it's not 20%, 30%, 40% of my portfolio. And I have had people reach out to me saying, how could this happen? You know, you had such conviction. First and foremost, that's my conviction. I'm also looking at a 10-year, 20-year time horizon. You might be looking at 1 to 2 years. Make sure when you're listening to people, whether it's Palantir, whether it's Amit on DNA, or whether that's me talking about Rocket Lab, ensure that when you're listening to someone, you're listening to the entire picture. You're perceiving exactly what they perceive. Where I'm looking at this at a 10, 20-year time horizon, it's a small portion of my portfolio. I can afford this to go to zero. Ensure that you're managing your risk. Are you looking at it a 1 to 2 year time horizon versus a 10-year? If you're looking at 1 to 2, the volatility can be much more drastic in that risk management aspect of things. And also keep in mind that, are you creeping up in the 20%, 30% of your portfolio sizing for these things where it could have much more of an impact on your long-term investment thesis? So just when you listen to people on the internet, sometimes we look for confirmation bias, but be sure to tick all your boxes, not just the ones that you want them to tick.
I agree.
Sorry.
Thank you for being our registered financial advisor, giving us the financial
NFA
regulations we need to. NFA, not financial advice. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.